end of the Cold War. Basically, in the 80s, the Soviet Union's entire system politically and economically is under severe stress. Keep in mind they're trying to keep up economically with the United States when it comes to like all their satellite nations, and actually in 1985 they're in the 6th year of trying to control Afghanistan, and so things are just not going well for them. So they're going to get Mikhail Gorbachev, who becomes the general secretary of the Communist Party during this time period. And he basically recognized that if the Soviet Union really did want to keep up with the United States, it had to modernize. However, the issue was it's just a huge burden for the Soviet Union to keep spending specifically on defense spending. And so he recognized he needed to spend less on defense if he wanted to modernize the Soviet Union state. So during Reagan's second term, we're going to see the Soviet Union offers concession after concession after concession, basically. And a lot of these concessions were driving for control of armaments. And so it's things we're going to see following that. The Soviet Union's going to cut back on their Warsaw Pact nations, what they're spending on them. They even go as far as to agree to like on-site inspections. And of course, Reagan's going to embrace this new Soviet position. In fact, this is all going to end up with the negotiation of the INF, which is the Intermediate Nuclear Force Agreement. This actually was over the strong objections of like the CIA and the Defense Department. The thing is, the INF is really the first actual nuclear disarmament treaty. So before, when we saw like SALT and SALT II, even though that failed, there was an element that was more like a speed limit when it came to producing nuclear armaments. So it was a slowing down, but this is actually going to destroy weaponry. Basically, this new pact matched Soviet SS-20s with United States cruise missiles, and they classified them as an entire class of weapons, and they destroyed them with on-site inspections to verify the destruction of these weapons. So this is actually a break and not just taking your foot off the gas pedal, so to speak. When it comes to Eastern Europe, and later on, we're going to see Bush is the United States president at this point, and he's going to view diplomacy more like a series of like conversations and friendships amongst leaders rather than like a reconciliation of different national interests. So he's recognizing that a lot of nations are not going to necessarily have the same priorities as the United States, but we could still get along with them on some level. And so we're going to see the United States really pushing for more of a pro-democratic transformation of Eastern Europe, for example. But Bush is really careful, and America on some level is really careful not to like gloat too publicly when things start leaning towards democracies more and more so in Eastern Europe, because that might damage like Gorbachev's position in the Soviet Union. And they didn't want to set back any of this progress and everything. In fact, Gorbachev also lends a hand in this on some level, because he's going to urge a lot of the Eastern European allies to basically free up their economies from the Soviet Union's stifling controls. He basically told the nation they could do it their own way without fearing like reprisals from the Soviet Union, like we saw back with like Hungary in 1956. So basically it's saying that you can choose not to go the same way as the Soviet Union. And so in this way, what's happening is the Warsaw Pact system is basically collapsing. So we see like Poland held free elections. Then we get Hungary adopted a democratic constitution, and then they'd actually go on to force out communist leaders in other Eastern European countries. East Germans are going to flee west through Hungary, and eventually this pressure is going to make East Germany's government basically bow down, and this is when you see the destruction of the Berlin Wall. It's going to open up in the end of 1989. We're also seeing new democratic or at least non-communist governments in Czechoslovakia, Romania, Bulgaria, and now East Germany. And the big deal about all this is these were largely peaceful revolutions. And a lot of them are going to destroy like military and economic agreements that specifically had linked them to the Soviet Union's economy. And the Soviet Union's going to accept the loss of their satellite nations basically and withdrew their army slowly. Which actually brings us to Germany. So we're seeing the destruction of the Berlin Wall. And so really what this is going to lead to is German reunification. Because up until this point, we've had East Germany, you can see pictured in red to the right over here, and West Germany, which you can see pictured in blue. So West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl is going to reassure like Poland and Russia that basically Germany is not going to seek to change any kind of boundary that was drawn after World War II. Like Germany is happy with where they are. They're not going to try to force other groups back under their control that had been there previously to World War II. Also on top of that, in 1990, the United States and the Soviet Union is going to agree that the reunited Germany is going to belong to NATO. So this is very much tying in Germany, East and West, now all together as one Germany, into the Western world. We also get the Soviet Union holds free elections in 1989. Basically, Gorbachev scheduled this vote on a new constitution in the Soviet Union, and this new constitution would have decreased the power of the central government in the Soviet Union. However, old-line communist bureaucrats feared this change, and they're going to actually go on to arrest Gorbachev. But they made this a huge political blunder because basically they hadn't secured military support. And so within 3 days, these plotters, they themselves are now under arrest. So we have this coup, but really this is just going to hasten the fragmentation of the Soviet Union, really. We're going to see at this point the Soviet Union would go on to ban the Communist Party, Gorbachev resigns, and all of that previously like suppressed nationalist feelings in the different states that made up the Soviet Union now is going to cause basically this 15 component republics of the Soviet Union to declare their independence. And so at that point, the Soviet Union is no longer. It ceases to exist. Russia, if you look at this, you can see is the largest and strongest of the new states, and that remains the case to this day, but you can see all the different states that fragmented out of the Soviet Union. So this is really considered the end of the Cold War. Now, there is this great question about this. How much did the United States really have to do with it versus how much of it was just internal Soviet problems? The thing is, we know that there were problems internally, but we also know that some of these problems were caused by like United States spending and United States policy globally. And so this is actually a really highly debated topic amongst a lot of historians about how much did the United States have to do with this, so to speak. So I ask you, why is the end of the Cold War important today? How does it impact us personally? So now that the Cold War is over, so to speak, you could argue that there's a whole different Cold War, but I'm not going to get into that. Now that that is over, how does that affect you personally? Think about how maybe the Cold War affected your parents and how it doesn't affect you in the same way, or even your grandparents, depending on ages and everything like that. Or if you were alive at that time, how were you impacted by the Cold War, but you don't have to worry about those things like today?